Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good evening. This is our reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda. There are 3 volumes of his collected works. He was the apostle to the south. He spent many years starting the work in the south part of India. And today we are going to first read a chapter called Yoga and Nature.
Ready?
Yes.
All that a man has learnt here in this world, he surely has not learned from books, but rather directly or indirectly from nature. For books are nothing other than the records of men's experiences about nature. So in reality, nature is our teacher. Whenever nature teaches us, we become really learned and gain something thereby, not only for ourselves, but for others. When young James Watt studied the action of steam in the boiling kettle before him, he made a valuable contribution to the progress of the human race. When Benjamin Franklin was flying the kite and detected the existence of electricity in the clouds, he gained a new and most useful servant for man. Similarly, by studying nature, George Stephenson was able to invent the locomotive engine. All these incidents clearly show that nature is the book, the study of which gives us the greatest return. Our Indian yogis, knowing this, deeply studied the book of nature and ultimately found out the methods which took them beyond nature. Through the study of the inner aspect of nature, they opened a channel of unlimited knowledge. They could subsist without food any length of time, and they gained supernatural powers which our modern science cannot even dream of. That a man can become practically all-knowing, they seem to have at first learnt from studying the property of a convex lens. Ordinarily, the solar rays have no burning power. But if brought together at the focus of the lens, they will begin to burn. This burning power is brought about by the convergence of the scattered rays of the sun to a single point. This fact suggested to the mind of the yogi that because the mind is distributed through the senses and as such is scattered in all directions, it has only the ordinary power of knowing what is visibly going on in this world, and of knowing that, but very partially. If, however, he could call his mind back from all external pursuits and all concentrated on one idea or at one point, as in the case of the focused solar rays, then why should it not be able to perceive both these ordinary things and many extraordinary things also? He made the experiment and was successful.
Yes, Vivekananda says much the same thing. He says the power of the mind is like the scattered rays of light, and when they're focused, they illumine. And so that's the idea behind meditation techniques. And also, as he's mentioning here, the study of nature. Many of the great scientists had this power of concentration. They would concentrate on a particular phenomenon and focus on it clearly, and they would then find out the secret of nature. So, and I'm sure we've all discovered that at one time or other in studying when we were in school or in some other phenomenon where we have to solve some sort of problem. And if we can keep our mind calm but focused, we can often come up with the solution. If you're taking a test, maybe the answer doesn't pop into your head right away, but if you just sit and focus and clear the mind and try to focus on the nature of the question, sometimes the answer will pop into your head. So this is the idea behind meditation, and of course this is his topic, is the nature of yoga and nature, how we learn from nature and how we have to focus our mind to do it. And of course, as he mentioned, many of our great scientists were just very good observers of nature. And of course, I've mentioned this before. Some of my favorite examples are a couple of plant scientists. Luther Burbank was a student of Self-Realization Fellowship, which teaches meditation practice, and he was able to do many remarkable things with his plants because he knew how to focus his mind. All right, let's continue.
This intense increase in the power of the mind was learnt also from the current of a stream. If we build a dam across a flowing stream, keeping only a very small aperture in the embankment, the water which then comes out of that aperture has 1,000-fold more power than the ordinary current of the stream. This suggested to them the idea that if by shutting up all other outlets of the mind, it is made to flow through one outlet, it must acquire powers unknown to it before. In this manner, the yogi discovered the extraordinary powers which mental concentration can produce.
And of course, this is also the secret of various martial arts as well, where they're focusing their mind and therefore all their chi energy or their prana into a particular direction, and that gives their motion greater power against their opponent. Okay.
He also studied the habits of frogs, tortoises, snakes, and found out that frogs do not eat anything during the whole of the winter. That snakes live chiefly on air, and the tortoises can draw in their limbs at their will, and thus become protected against all danger, and can live without food for any length of time. In winter, the body of a frog is almost assimilated to the earth. Apparently, there's no sign of life in it. But as soon as the spring season sets in, the warm rain brings new life to it, and the frog becomes active again. To get rid of the cravings of hunger, the yogis imitated the winter life of these creatures. Like the limbs of a tortoise, they learned to draw in all the scattered parts of their mind and concentrate them at one point. Then they could subsist without food for a long time. The snake and the tortoise breathe after long intervals. This suggested to them the efficacy of holding the breath or performing pranayama. They found out that these creatures eat very little and live very long. So when they wanted to be blessed with long lives, they determined to imitate their methods. When a man attains the highest perfection in pranayama, or the control of the breath, then daily a small quantity of milk is sufficient to support his life.
You know, that reminds me, there's a theory that we evolved from a group of great apes that had gotten stranded on an island and then had to adapt to the ocean for a long time in order to get food, and that's why we have the ability to control our breath. And by the ability to control your breath, you get the ability to speak and communicate with complicated sentences. You get the ability to sing, and then, of course, you have the ability to do pranayama. If you can't control your breath, you can't do pranayama. So if we hadn't, according to this theory, the aquatic ape theory, if we hadn't had that time when our ancestors had to learn how to cope with living in the water and diving down into the water for seashells or sea life down at the among the rocks underneath the water, to do that you have to hold your breath. And so in order to do that, we learned how to control our breath. Interesting theory. All right.
When the quantity of a yogi's food becomes very small, his general constitution becomes a little weak, no doubt, but a certain glow comes from his face, which is nowhere perceptible except in a yogi. We may know a yogi by his eyes, so sweetly brilliant do they become. Once upon a time, in olden days, a sage, it is said, went out of his hermitage to see one of his brother sages in a distant forest. Leaving the charge of his little homestead in the hands of one of his young disciples, the boy daily offered oblations in the fire, and thus propitiated the god of fire, who, appearing before him, initiated him in the knowledge of the self. When the sage returned, he was astonished to find the face of his disciple beaming with the full glow of knowledge, and he at once inquired, "Who is it, my boy? Your face is shining like that of a knower of the self." The face is the index of a man's character, and especially is this true of the eyes. Whether we are happy or unhappy can be easily detected in our eyes. The eye is the window of the soul. Whatever we feel and think may be detected through the eye. The eye undergoes as many modifications as the mind within, and an expert can find out what is going on within by simply looking at the eyes. This branch of knowledge goes under the name Chakshuvidya, or the science of optical control and mind reading. The man who is well versed in this art can fascinate or madden a person by the management of his optical powers. Through the light of a man's eyes, a yogi can enter his mind by making the light of his own eye harmonize with it. And a mental connection being thus established between the eyes, he is enabled to dive into the other man's mind and turn it so as to bring it within his control. In the process of mesmerism, some such action takes place.
And of course, that's a yogic power that we don't recommend that you try. Of course, some great teachers exhibit that kind of power, but for us ordinary people, that kind of power becomes a great distraction. It's hard enough to put up with the thoughts of your own mind. You start picking up the thoughts of other people's mind, and you've got double trouble. You've got more thoughts to try to control and keep out of your mind. I've known people that have had to, started meditation practice, and they start having some experiences like that where they suddenly are able to pick up other people's thoughts and so forth. And so then they have to go back to their spiritual teacher and say, "What do I do?" And they say, "Yeah, it's a big pain in the neck, isn't it? This is what you do to get rid of that." So that's the kind of thing we don't really encourage pursuing, but it sometimes does come to people along the path as they practice meditation. All right.
The first lesson in the acquirement of this optical power is to practice the trataka. That is to go on staring at a minute object until tears appear and obstruct the eyesight. A man should attentively look upon a certain minute object without winking till tears flow from his eyes. This process is known by the name of trataka. This trataka cures all optical maladies, drives away sleepiness, increases the power of eyesight, enables a man to see even the minutest things which an ordinary man has to see with the help of a microscope, and brings about sundry other beneficial results. In olden days, this practice was so prevalent in India that even women were known to be experts in it. Once upon a time, when a learned assembly had met, an ascetic lady, it is said, entered the court of Janaka. She had a doubt as to Janaka's being a genuine knower of the truth, and she wanted to examine him by entering his mind through the light of his eyes. This she easily did, and entering Janaka's mind, she tried to bring it under her control. But not being able to do that, she at last concluded that he was a real jnani, or knower.
Well, that's a story I haven't heard before. I don't know. That was very interesting. You never know. The Swami Ramakrishnananda is quite a unique soul, and has a different perspective sometimes and different stories than you've heard other places. Okay.
The practice of yoga, especially for a beginner, the natural conditions are carefully taken into account. The sages give the following advice. Upon a level, clean spot without any pebbles or flints, a yogi should sit to meditate. His environment should be pleasant and agreeable to his taste. No bad sight should trouble his eyes. No sudden noise should disturb his ears. When a man is half asleep, if then a sudden noise arises, his sleep completely forsakes him, and he is sorely troubled. Similarly, when a man has but half effected his concentration, if then a sudden noise or a troublesome sight brings him down from his height, who can describe the distress which he then feels within himself? This is the reason why a pleasant and solitary place is advisable for a beginner.
Of course, once the concentration is achieved, it might even be difficult to distract them with a sound. The concentration becomes so great that distracting sounds are not even heard. And we've even experienced that in an ordinary way when we might be very focused on a particular thing going on in our environment, reading a book or watching a movie or trying to study something intensely, and somebody says something and we don't pay any attention to them. We focused so much on our task at hand. All right.
I've already told you that the holding of the breath is necessary for the concentration of mind. Sometimes even ordinary jugglers practice this in order to perform certain feats. By practicing this process of stopping the breath gradually, all their nerves and veins become inflated with a peculiar kind of very light gas, which makes their bodies rise up a few feet above the ground. These people generally exhibit this feat in girls. When girls are very young, they teach them to stay underwater longer and longer. In this way, they make them learn to hold their breath for a considerable length of time. After this, they ask them to practice this restraint of the breath, sitting upon a heap of sand. When they have held their breath for some minutes, gradually these jugglers remove the sand from beneath them. And after a few days' practice, the girls are actually found to be sitting in the air. But although these juggler girls can perform all these extraordinary feats, they're nothing more than mere juggler girls. We've already noticed that yogis can live without food for a long time. Many may not believe it, but we find no reason why we should disbelieve it. In the state of sleep, we have no craving for food. We've read of men who sleep continually for a month, during which time they do not eat anything at all. Still, their bodies are stout and healthy. There was a man in Bilton living in a place called Timbury. He was a common laborer and used to fall asleep for more than a month. During this period, not a drop of water entered his stomach. Still, he was strong and stout as a healthy man. The sudden mental shock is also another cause for the destruction of appetite. Once upon a time, a woman living in a village named Damarhudo, Bengal, suddenly lost her husband. She was so overpowered with grief, she did not take any food or any drink for more than a score of days. After coming to herself, she wanted to take a little food, but instantly she threw it up. Next day she tried, the result was the same. Finally, after repeated attempts, she stopped taking any food and lived for several years without eating. She was in the habit of bathing daily, and this kept her perfectly healthy. These are historical facts, and consequently, we cannot deny them. Now let us consider the case of a yogi. A yogi has no physical labor to go through. Much of this time is spent in samadhi, or the superconscious state, which outwardly resembles sleep. His mind is concentrated on one point, he having no other desire than the realization of truth. When we consider these things, does it then appear impossible that a yogi may live without food for any length of time? 1 point more, besides our 2 eyes, the yogis speak of a third eye. The 2 external eyes can see only what is before them. This third eye can see what is going on within or anywhere in the subtler realm of being. The third eye is called the divine eye. Its seat is between the eyebrows. The end and aim of a yogi is to open this third eye. When the mind becomes calm, when passions and desires vanish from within, then this third eye opens, enables the yogi to see many extraordinary things. Eternal peace is then established in him. Soul consciousness is gained. Maya or illusion can have no further influence over him. The man dies in him, and the God rises in its place. The human gives way to the divine. Before the attainment of such a high state, a yogi experiences many extraordinary things. Sometimes he sees deified forms moving in the clouds. Sometimes he smells a delicious fragrance. And sometimes he hears celestial voices within his body. You will hear the sound of a bell or the music of a flute. Sometimes he perceives his ideal seated up at the lotus of his heart. We cannot easily account for all these phenomena. When any man is blessed with such visions, with super-earthly experiences, then he may understand that the attainment of his goal is very near.
You know, it is true that when we become focused on something, sometimes we inadvertently stop breathing. Somehow, when you don't breathe, you can focus more. And then, of course, pretty soon you realize you need to take a breath, too. People study hibernation of different animals, and different animals do it a little differently. Some of them go through a kind of a sleep-wake cycle where they go into extremely deep sleep, and maybe just briefly for a few moments, a few seconds every day, raise to a higher level, and then go right back into a very, very deep sleep. And others do it for more like months at a time. So these different animals have different kinds of hibernation tactics in order to stay alive during the long winter months when the food is scarce. And so they are able to control their bodily functions and reduce the bodily functions to an absolute minimum. And you can study their heart rate and so forth, and it goes down to, maybe just a beat or two a minute rather than 60 or 80 beats a minute. And by this, they're conserving their energy. The body temperature drops, and all the metabolism slows down to a very, very low level. And so this is the way hibernation works. And in some sense, this is the type of thing that's happening here, where the yogi is able to control the bodily functions to such extent that they don't need the normal amounts of food and water. Well, this is a very interesting chapter. But it's also interesting, you didn't bring this out, is that the early theories of religion also came about from observing nature. And the various powers that were observed in nature were then deified and given the status of certain gods and goddesses, because there seemed to be a power in them. And of course, this is something that we think about when we're thinking about the Divine Mother. We think of the Divine Mother as Shakti, the power behind the whole universe. And so anytime you see a manifestation of power, we think of it as a manifestation of Shakti. And so if you want to personify that particular aspect in a particular way, that's perfectly okay. And many times then the Divine Mother will actually manifest in the forms that you think about as a power of nature. So nature really is the first teacher in how we perceive the universe. And not only in our ordinary sense of concentrating our mind on problems in the universe in order to try to figure out how to work with nature, but also in trying to understand the nature of nature, how to understand the nature of this universe and how it works. All right, this next section is extremely short. It's an extract from a talk a class talk given in 1912. That would have been towards the end of his life, as I remember. All right.
Modern science is the best commentary on the Vedas. The Vedas mean right knowledge. The word is derived from vid, to know, just as science also comes from a verb, meaning to know. What is the difference between modern science and the whole transcendental science of the Vedas? The method is the same. Modern science moves over the surface only, while the Vedas go deep into the very heart of existence. Modern scientists analyzed and found that the world was made up of atoms, or as they now declare, of electrons. What is an atom or an electron? They do not say. They do not take us beyond that. It is as if it were preached thus far and no farther. They go to a certain distance. Beyond that, they do not go. Again, according to modern science, the world is wholly material. But matter is always darkness. Therefore, modern science, so long as it deals with the material realm, only must lead to darkness, to more and more confusion. Matter leads to matter, and never to spirit. So through matter, spirit cannot be known.
Yeah, you know, science is a process of trying to understand the things around us in the universe. And if you look at the history of science, which is too bad they don't teach more of, you see that we've come up with various models and theories as to about how the universe works. And then we come up with ways of explaining the universe in terms of that model. And now, it's interesting that the current model is getting more and more mystical as it goes, but most scientists still take the attitude that it's a material universe and that they're trying to explain everything from a materialistic point of view. But if you take it, some of the theories at its face value, you find that this materialistic idea really doesn't fit the data anymore. And so we may be in for another shift of paradigm, is what they call it. Each time science goes through a great revolution, it's because they shift their paradigm and come up with a different way of thinking about the universe. And I think the ultimate shift in paradigm will be when scientists realize that there's something like consciousness that is the ground of existence, not simply material matter. There are many interesting connections that we find between the ancient Vedic ideas and modern science. One interesting one that I like to remind people of is the 5 elements. You see, originally the 5 elements were not like the elements of chemistry today, which number, I don't know, over 115 or something. I've lost track how many, and some of them only last for a billionth of a second, so I'm not sure how useful it is to count them. But anyway, the original 92 natural elements and then the trans-uranium elements that have been discovered since. Those are not the same as the elements that are referred to in the Vedas. In the Vedas, these 5 elements are connected with our sense organs. And our sense organs are able to detect various kinds of energies. So actually, the 5 elements of antiquity are the 5 energies which make up the universe. And you see modern science, thanks to Einstein, has said that E equals mc squared. Energy is equivalent to matter times c squared. And so if you realize that this universe is made up of 5 energies, which we sometimes interpret as matter, then you see this type of 5-element theory actually works. And so those 5 elements are akasha associated with the ear, and that's not the sense of hearing, it's the sense of gravity, our sense of being in a gravitational field and knowing where down is and not getting dizzy. So that's your ear is sensing your orientation in the gravitational field. And then from Akasha comes Vayu, and Vayu is wind. It's not air, it's wind. That's the energy of the wind moving. It's the air moving. That's kinetic energy. And kinetic energy is, in the Vedas, they associate this element with your skin. Why? Because your skin senses temperature, and temperature is the motion of molecules, kinetic energy. So then you go on from Vayu to Tejas. Again, Tejas is translated as fire. Tejas is something that shines. Fire is an example of something that shines, but it's not Tejas. Tejas is anything that shines. It's radiation. It's the radiation energy. The whole spectrum, even the stuff that we can't perceive with our eyes, the whole spectrum of electromagnetic radiation is symbolized as Tejas, and that's, of course, sensed by your eye. And then Ap and Prithivi are the last two, water and earth. And the earth is a great big bar magnet. And so the magnetic energy is associated with the earth, and water is a dipolar molecule, an electrical molecule where one end is more negatively charged and the other end is more positively charged. And that symbolizes electrical energy. So those 5 energies are perceived by our 5 sense organs, and those 5 energies indeed make up the universe. So indeed, the ancient Vedic wisdom had very profound insights into the nature of matter, which were not clearly understood. Our modern paradigms don't always understand that idea. But eventually, I think we'll come to the realization, or certainly make more progress, if a few people at least realize that the paradigm of looking at the nature of this universe has to include the nature of consciousness. When you think of it, both relativity theory and quantum mechanics depend on an observer. In relativity, the way you interpret space and time depends on the speed of the observer. In quantum mechanics, the wave function is collapsed due to an observer. And so the observer is mixed into it, and the observer's consciousness is mixed into the physics. And so that's really where the paradigm shift needs to come. All right, let's read the next paragraph.
It is not possible to know the infinite through the finite. We must first realize that we ourselves are infinite. For a finite mind, it is impossible to conceive of the Supreme Being. The finite can also never become infinite. You may hold that your mind, although finite, has an infinite potentiality of improvement. But let us see. Granted that it may go on indefinitely knowing facts, you may learn a great number this year, you may know still more next year. 100 years you may have learned more, and after a cycle a countless number. But always the number known, however great, must be a finite number, and compared to infinity will be infinitely small. Matter is that which is limited and which limits. Man now feels limited by coming in contact with matter. We must know that we are not matter, but spirit. We must cease to identify ourselves with this gross material body. We must join ourselves to God. When a man does this and realizes his true self, then all doubts are dispelled, all questions are answered, and he realizes the highest.
And of course, this is the reason we use symbols in our spiritual life, in our meditations and so forth, is that the limited mind can't really conceive of the nature of God without some sort of symbol. It's very difficult to try to grasp the infinite. An example would be trying to hold on to a ball. Well, it's very easy to hold on to a ping pong ball or a golf ball or a tennis ball or even a basketball. But if it gets to be a great big beach ball that's maybe 6 or 8 feet in diameter, it becomes more difficult to hold on to. And now picture a ball that's, say, 1 mile in diameter. There would be nothing to hang on to. It would be impossible to hang on to it. So the bigger and bigger it gets, the harder it is to hang on to it. And so similarly, we try to grasp the infinite, and we find that the mind is incapable of doing that. So we have to symbolize the infinite as the finite. Now remember that our consciousness is part of the cosmic consciousness. That consciousness which is in our mind and which seems limited as we work with our mind is actually connected to the cosmic consciousness. So anything that's possible in our mind is also possible in the cosmic consciousness and vice versa. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. And so these symbols become ways of grasping the infinite. And once we can hold on to the infinite in a symbolic way, in a finite symbol which represents the infinite can be grasped, and if we can focus our minds on that, as he was mentioning in the last chapter, focusing our mind on that will focus the rays of light of the mind on that particular ideal and allow us to grasp the infinite truth of that which is behind that symbol. So that's the nature of this reality. And of course, this is the idea behind symbols like Mother Kali, whom we will be worshiping on Monday. So hopefully you can join us online or in person, although it'll be awfully crowded in person. So I would suggest that many of you opt for the online, and with the powers of your mind, feel that you are here in person. That is probably a wonderful idea of meditation, really. You know, in our meditation, we can picture ourselves in Dakshineshwar or at Bellarmat or in any other spiritual place and feel that we are there in that holy atmosphere. So you can do the same thing here. You can feel that you're joining us in this temple as we do the Kali Puja. And this great symbol of the infinitude, Mother Kali, being worshipped in the temple as a way for us to go beyond the ordinary plane of existence and realize our infinitude within us. All right, we're going to talk about matter and spirit here. We'll get, we probably won't finish this, but let's just read a little bit of this.
The struggle of spirit against matter is what is meant by religion. The struggle must go on until spirit has conquered matter. Now we're like prisoners in the flesh. If a man is shut up in a prison, he may now and then get a smell of liberty. When the guards fall asleep or grow unmindful, then they fall upon him again, and he remembers that he is in prison. So we may now and then get a glimpse of freedom in this prison of the flesh, but again the senses fall upon us and drag us back. And to get out is altogether a different thing. Blessed indeed is the man who's able to overcome matter. This body is conceived in desire and born in desire. Hence it is a creature of desire, which means that in it matter predominates over spirit. Therefore, it is not an easy affair for us to overcome matter. But if we struggle hard enough, in course of time, we can even transform this body so that in it spirit will preponderate over matter.
Yeah, of course, you know, the symbol of Kali is a symbol of transcending the ordinary plane. Whereas, say, a symbol like Saraswati or Lakshmi is to help us within the realm of Maya, to help us with our creativity, to help us with our sustenance, and to be able to live a life with fewer problems and more and more beauty, and to be able to see the divinity within the realm of the world. But the Mother Kali image is trying to go beyond all of that. The severed arms around her waist symbolize cutting off from actions and realizing that we're not the doer. And the severed head is symbolic of cutting the ego. And as soon as we've cut the ego off, then we're not attached to our sense organs. We're not attached to our body. We're not attached to our desires. We're not attached to the things we've done. We don't desire to do new things and have new experiences. So that symbol of Mother Kali is really the symbol which represents our aim at cutting ourselves off from the nature of this world so that we can understand that we are the nature of the infinite. Her black color represents that infinitude. The infinitude seen close up appears as black, but when you perceive it in its reality, it will not seem as black. All right, let's read the next paragraph.
This struggle against matter is not the affair of a day, however. It takes a long time to master the habit of years and even lifetimes, during which matter has overruled spirit. But we must not be disheartened or give up, because until spirit has gained the victory, we can never taste lasting happiness. Nor must we ever feel secure. Happy indeed is the man who even for a moment is conscious of mastery over his flesh, but he must not stop struggling and think he has conquered, for at any time he may fail. Fall. Maya, or this world, is so irresistible. It is only when God is generous to us that we can lift the veil and get a glimpse of him. Maya is matter. Matter is dead, inert. But everywhere there is consciousness or spirit. Some may say that matter is the cause of motion, but every movement in the universe is full of consciousness. We know the existence of matter by darkness, ignorance, doubt, miseries, fear, while spirit is all perfect, all luminous, all blissful. It is all that matter is not. It has no doubt, no fear, no misery. Yet Maya has so many soft, sweet ways, only the wise can detect her. All these fleeting pleasures of the world are Maya. Sense desire is Maya. Hence, he who has conquered his senses has conquered the universe. If we can conquer sensuality, at once we shall realize our divinity and shall know that we are no different from God.
That's interesting, though. He says, Maya is matter, and matter is dead, inert, but everywhere there is consciousness or spirit. So in a sense, we see matter as dead, but in essence, it's full of consciousness. And in some sense, the goal is to focus on the consciousness that's behind the matter and permeating the matter, and not focusing on its external nature, which appears as dead. It focuses on the part that's not the consciousness that's within it. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. All right, that's pretty much our time. So we'll just have to remember that we've conquered 3 paragraphs of this, and next time we'll continue with this lecture on the matter and spirit. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace. Oh, you're very welcome. All right. Nice to have you all with us. So often we're used to saying, nice to see you all here, but when 80% of the people are online and we don't see them, it seems a little silly to say that.